Welcome to the Legends Behind the Craft podcast, where we feature top leaders in the wine and craft beverage industry with your host, Drew Hendricks. Now, let's get started with the show.
Drew Thomas Hendricks here. I'm the host of the Legends Behind the Craft podcast, where I talk with leaders in the wine and craft beverage industry, from design companies like Vint, who brings a winery's story to life through its labels, to today's guest, Ben Salisbury, president of Salisbury Creative Group, whose mission is to bring winery sales and marketing up to the modern age. Past guests of Legends Behind the Craft include Scout Driscoll of Vint, Lori Milote of Outshinery, and Ron Sharman, founder of Astra Digital. If you haven't listened to these yet, be sure to check them out and subscribe. Today's episode, sponsored by Barrels Ahead. At Barrels Ahead, we work with you to implement a one-of-a-kind marketing strategy, one that highlights your authenticity, tells your story, and connects you with your ideal customers. In short, we help wineries and craft beverage producers unlock their story to unleash their revenue. Go to barrelsahead.com today to learn more. Now, today's guest is Ben Salisbury. Ben is the founder and president of Salisbury Creative Group, a sales and strategy consulting firm that helps wineries and craft distilleries optimize their sales results by better leveraging technology. Now, Ben and I, we were on a panel hosted by Outshinery a few months ago where we discussed the pros and cons of different digital marketing channels available to wineries. And I'm super excited to continue that conversation today on Legends Behind the Craft. Now, Ben is a true legend. He's got 38 years of wine and spirits industry experience, including sales leadership roles with Ste Michelle Wine Estates and Constellation Brands. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Thank you, Drew. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Oh, I'm excited to have you on. So, I got to say, I just got back from Ste Michelle Winery. We visited some friends up in Tacoma, and they took us on a little wine tour. I could not believe how much. I think it was 20 years ago was the last time I was there. I don't know if you've been by that winery recently, but man, they have done a lot with their interior layout.
The tasting room had a major redo a few years ago. I have not been back. I've not been back to the chateau since I left in 2009, but I spent 12 years there, and it's some of my favorite years that I've been in the business. I have great memories of working there.
Yeah. So tell me about, how did you get into the business?
Well, I went to college for culinary arts and food service management. My first career was in the restaurant business, but I really got bitten by the wine bug when I was working in a very fancy French restaurant at the top of the Biltmore Hotel in Providence. And I got into wine, and wasn't too long that I was made the move to work for a wine distributor, selling wine to restaurants. So that was and that was in 1984. I was 24, 25 years old, and that's how I got my start. So I carried a bag on the streets of Houston, selling to restaurants and liquor stores early in my wine career. It was a very different time back then. A few years later, I got seriously focused on selling to chain restaurants back when the chains were really starting to grow. And so I stayed as a specialist in that area for 17 years. And that's what I did for Ste Michelle Wine Estates and what I did for Constellation. I ran a large national sales team that focused on the big chains. And since both those companies were publicly traded, I was forced to learn a level of business acumen that I might not have gotten otherwise. So I'm very thankful for those experiences. And it really helped me be a good consultant today, having learned all those systems and disciplines and processes.
Sure, that in the trenches experience, it's irreplaceable. And that kind of brings us right into the meat of the matter here, is that you're devoted to kind of bringing everybody to what you call like the modern winery playbook, or the modern wine and craft selling playbook. And you do a lot of business with in that 3-tier space. Before we talk about the modern winery playbook, talk to me a little bit about what the old playbook is and why so many wineries are still using it and why it no longer works.
Yeah, this is such a great topic, Drew. You know, things have changed a lot in the wine business, and yet most people are still operating as if nothing had changed when it comes to the way they sell. And so this is a great topic to talk about. What is the old playbook and what are the plays in the old playbook? Because if you recognize that they don't work anymore, you can then start working, running plays out of the new playbook. So in the world of 3-tier especially, the world has always revolved around the 3-tier system and the distributor. A
Mhm.
winery would go and find a great distributor in each market that they wanted to be for sale. They would form a great partnership. That distributor would bring in their inventory and turn loose their team of salespeople out of the market to build new distribution and sales. It was a beautiful time. I worked both as a distributor and a supplier through the
Mhm.
80s, 90s, and 2000s in that system. But two interesting things happened. One, the proliferation of new brands and wineries just out of control, especially in the last 10 years. And the number of distributors has shrunk considerably from like 3,000 distributors in the US down below 700. And so the ratio of brands to distributors is completely out of whack. And that's why the plays in the old playbook don't work. So here are the plays. Find a good distributor, educate the distributor, motivate the distributor, get out and work with the distributor, manage the distributor. Those plays don't work because all distributors, small, large, and medium, are just completely overwhelmed with all the things they have to sell. So the bottom line is this, Drew. The burden of building new distribution and sales has shifted from the distributor back to the producer. And the saying that I would like to see wineries, large and small, everywhere adopt for themselves is, if it's important to us, we're going to have to do it ourselves. So that is
great. That is a great observation there. I got my start in the wine industry as a buyer at a wine store. So I was always sitting on the other side of the tasting table as the reps came in and poured for me. And very rarely, every once in a while, a winery would come in on a road show. They'd swing by with the distributors. And that was really the only contact we had with the actual winery as a buyer. And what you say makes sense. In '93, I must have been buying from 50 or 60 different brokerage firms and distributors in San Francisco, and they each have a manageable portfolio. So you could taste 60, 70 wines a day and get a pretty good, accurate, complete view of their product. But that's no longer the case. It's really, you can't just shove the burden off to the distributors and expect it to be sold. So how does a winery succeed in today's market?
Yeah, so one quick thing before we go on to what the new playbook is like, which is very exciting, because once you understand the old plays don't work and you know what the new plays are, you can get down to business executing it. But something else that's changed a lot, and that's the way people buy and the way products are sold. When there were fewer wine brands out there, you could take time to open a bottle and experience it with the buyer and talk about the attributes of the wine and talk about the winemaker's style. And that no one has time for that anymore. The idea that you're being too product focused is actually a detriment. There has to be a larger relationship at work based on service and dependability, because the fact is there are lots of great Cabernets out there, lots of great Chardonnays. It's really hard to differentiate with your product alone. So selling for a small or medium or even a large winery has to be about something in addition to just the product. Having a great product and a great story and a great package, all that does is get you to the starting line. So it's not enough of a differentiator. So that being said, let's talk about the new. I was
talking to 10th Mountain Whiskey last week, and he helps small distilleries basically launch. He's got a blueprint for launch, and one of his biggest things was, you can't, just because you've got a great product and if you build it, they won't come. You've got to promote it.
Yes, and a lot of this has to do with having more strategies that are scalable. So number one of the new playbook is don't depend too much on your distributor. I'm not saying don't use them. They're an indispensable part of the 3-tier system, probably never going away. The first play in the new playbook is don't depend too much on them. Start doing a lot more of that yourself. Lower your expectations of what they can do for you. No amount of motivation or education is going to change that. So once you accept that, you're free to move on to some of the other things.
And we had talked about how distributors, basically logistics, consider them the logistics provider. Yes. They're moving the product, but they're not in charge of marketing the product.
That's right. There's really only 3 things you can ask of your distributor. This is a good starting place. Hold a little of your product in the inventory. Deliver it to the accounts that you and your team have sold to, and potentially match your efforts. So if you go out and build 10 new points of distribution, you ought to be able to ask the distributor to match your 10. They're far more likely to do something for you if you go do it first. So, If every winery listening to this podcast would just start with that as their baseline expectation, they would be so much happier with how things are going. So another play in the new playbook is you've got to leverage 80-20. Not all the accounts are equal. You have to know where your products fit best. You have to do research on each market that you're in. You need to know who the players are. Is it a chain-driven market or an independent? Is there, there are one or two major players that suck up all the opportunity for that market. It's a very data-driven and business intelligence-driven game now. It's not as sexy as talking about how the wine was made, but it is essential.
But in order to know your market, you need to know your ideal customer. You may want to sell your wines nationwide, but there's going to be certain areas that will resonate with your winery. And if you don't know your ideal customer, you don't know where those areas are.
Well, and I can't tell you how many wineries try to show up at a distributor and talk about their products as if that's enough to make them want to bring them on. What the distributor sitting across the table wants to hear is that you have studied the market. You know where all the business is done. You know who the major players are. You know what the competitive landscape is like. You know what the competition looks like inside their own portfolio. And that you have realistic expectations about what can be done in the first 6 months, in the first year, the first 2 years. Any winery that walks in like that to a distributor is going to get respect and they're going to take them on. But it is pretty rare because people think it's all about the product.
Yeah, it's figuring out that like here's a weak point in your portfolio. Here's how our wine will fit the bill there and solve your issue. So you're really it's really there's the burden's on the winery.
It really is. So the other plays in the modern playbook are all about technology.
Okay.
CRM, CRM, lead generation, email for trade sales, like leveraging email software in the same way that the direct-to-consumer people have been doing for years to service consumers. The three-tier trade world needs to be using those same tools and disciplines and practices for managing a large audience of trade buyers. They need to know how to attract those people, get them to enroll in a trade-only email list, and use expert email marketing to cultivate and build relationships with them. One other good rule of thumb here, Drew, is if it can't be scaled, you need to set it aside in favor of something that can be scaled. One-to-one selling, one buyer with a couple bottles of wine sitting down with one, a seller and a buyer sitting at a table drinking samples. This is not scalable. It is. You just can't get to where you need to go. But if you were to do a webinar where you're giving an expert training on, blending, for example, and the only people who'd be interested in a webinar like this would be very experienced, very knowledgeable sommeliers. And you had 40 or 50 of them show up for the webinar and they had to register for that webinar and give you their name and their title and the place they work and their email address. That could be the beginning of managing a relationship with a large group of trade buyers. This is infinitely scalable. And so you have to, in the three-tier world, you have to take a lot of pages out of the DTC playbook and adapt them to the three-tier world. So that's CRM, email, understanding how to do things at scale. So it's very different and it's not very sexy. I know. And some people say, well, I didn't sign up for all this tech stuff. I just love wine and I love to sell wine and I love serving my customers. Those things
and that's the problem in the wine industry. It's people get into the industry, even if they're in the tech, they could have exited a tech IPO in Silicon Valley, be worth, and suddenly they become a farmer in Napa, and they forget how to use email. It's like it actually the wine industry seems to like it's an atavistic kind of industry, really, where people kind of get into it as almost an escape oftentimes, but they forget that you can't give up the marketing part.
Yeah, it would be nice to you don't have to give up all of that passion for the product and the process and the romance. You don't have to give it up, but you do need to overlay some more modern selling strategies. And when I see our clients, the light bulbs come on for this, and I see them out there doing these things, and I see them getting results. It's very satisfying. And then you have to wonder, well, why aren't more people doing this? Why are people still doing? Nothing wrong with wine dinners per se, but you'll never, if you have 10,000 cases of wine to sell, do you know how many wine dinners you would have to do to sell 10,000 cases? A lot, because you might sell 5 cases at that dinner. So it's just getting out of the mindset of what used to work no longer works or doesn't work as well. And even if you get people to accept that, where they stumble is, well, they don't know what to do instead. And so that's what you and I are talking about today, what to do instead.
Like, so just so everyone listening here, on your website, Salisbury Creative, you have an e-course, the Modern Winery Playbook that people can sign up for right now. And you also have an amazing video that I tell people all about. It's the Small Winery Marketing on a Shoestring, which is more on a global side. But in that playbook, we talk about CRMs. What advice do you give on a CRM? Do you outline specific ones, or really just find one and use it?
Well, I love talking about CRM, Drew. It's one of my favorite topics. And I like to tell people CRM is two things. It's a software tool for sure, right? We all get that. But it's also a disciplined process for selling. I like to say that follow-up is the key to great sales, not persuasion or overcoming objections. Follow-up. You want to sell a lot of wine? Be an expert in follow-up. And the best way to have perfect follow-up is using a CRM system. There's a lot of details to keep track of the accounts themselves and the attributes of the account. You know, do they have a Sunday brunch? Do they have a happy hour? Do they have a captain's list? Do they serve sell large format bottles? Do they have a Cruvinet program? There's a lot of information about each account that you need to keep track of, and you can do that in a CRM. And then all the information about the buyers themselves. Who are their influencers? Where have they been to Europe? Which wineries have they visited? Where do they used to work? Who's their boss now? All these, if you want customer relationship management executed really well, is about those knowledge points about the accounts and the customers. So really leaning into it and wanting to have all those things in one place. So you have information about the accounts, information about the buyer contacts, and then information about all the interactions you've had, every email, every text, every DM, all in one place where you can recall it when you need it. And then you can put in all of your current distribution information and depletion information in there too. So I still see people running around with a spiral notebook or a legal pad, or keeping track of their contacts in their Outlook contact list. This is nowhere nearly robust enough to leverage the power of CRM.
Yeah. I like what you were talking about on the processes. The most important thing about the CRM is not the actual CRM, whether it's HubSpot, Salesforce, Pipedrive, whatever CRM you're using. It's the processes behind it. And too often with our clients, we hear the shiny object syndrome, like, oh, I think we just need to move to Salesforce. Or I think HubSpot's going to solve all of our problems. And it's similar to like an athlete in a gym, whether you're on a life fitness cycle or whether you're on the next cycle, it's the processes in the gym that actually get the results, not so much the equipment. And I try to get people off that, like switching, like, let's just show you how to use what you have before we add another or switch you off something.
That's a great analogy. And I've spent a lot of time trying to study these stumbling blocks around using CRM. And a couple of things that come up time and again, which are worth thinking about, is if the sale is merely a transaction where I'm giving you information until you appreciate what I'm offering and then you buy it and you give me money. If that's how sales are truly made, then why do you need a CRM? Because you make the appointment and you go in with your samples and you make the sale. But that is not how real selling works. Real selling requires 10, 12, multiple touch points. It requires service first, dependability first, product knowledge later. It's a longer term play. I like to say, and this is not my quote, it comes from Jeff Toole in his book, Mastering the Complex Sale. He says that a sale should be nothing more than a byproduct of a much larger relationship.
Yes.
I have over 60 videos on YouTube, but there's one that's 10 times as popular as the rest combined, and it's called The Secret to Selling Wine on Premise. I invite your listeners to check it out. But this is what it talks about. It talks about the secret to selling on premise is putting the customer's needs first, having a long-term approach, and bringing real value to the business relationship. That is not a transaction. So when you move away from the transactional way of selling and into more of a systems and relationship selling, CRM is right there at the center of your needs, because you keep track of all that information in one place and you can recall it anytime you want from your phone. So that's the biggest stumbling block of people using CRM. They're too transactional in their sales approach and they don't see a need for CRM. But that's a recipe for failure.
And I find that one of the, I like what you said about the 10 to 12 touch points, and you need a CRM to figure out where you're in that sequence. Is it the first one? And what information are you giving someone at that touch point? Because the one sure sign that I see on that complex sale is if you get to the proposal stage, you get to the sales stage, and you're still writing 20 pages of a proposal, you haven't done it right. But in a consultative sales through the CRM, the sale just happens naturally. And people go, "How'd you do it?" "What? You just closed this huge deal with a paragraph?" Because it was already there.
That is exactly right. And for people wanting to learn how to sell that way, Mastering the Complex Sale is the definitive book that will show you how to, that a sale is a process. It's a bit protracted. And if you're patient and you're willing to submit to that protracted process, you will sell far more product than you ever thought possible. But when you put samples that you need to sell in a sample bag and you run around to a dozen different restaurants, talking about the products in your bag that you need to sell or you have a quota on or that have a incentive on, this is not real selling. This is about as unprofessional as you can get. Second, maybe only to used car selling.
I love that you said used car, because it's wheeling and dealing. And that's the way it was back when I was a buyer, where the distributor had 50 cases of Chardonnay they needed to unload. And they're pouring it, and they're trying to convince me to buy it. So they've got to start including other stuff to sweeten the deal. And they make one big package deal where I bet 50 cases of Chard, but I had to get but they had to throw in 10 cases of this allocated wine so I could do it. And it's a hustler's way of doing it.
It is. And, you do it enough, you could certainly sell enough. But as a brand owner, you cannot afford to be trying to sell this way. You need to have a relationship with some key buyers around the country. So let's say you're a small winery and you're doing everything you can in your tasting room and you're doing everything you can to get visitors there. You're doing a great job of enrolling wine club members. You have a really robust email list with a high open rate and you get a pretty good return on your email campaigns, but it's still not enough. You'd like to sell more. Now it's time to start thinking about how to crack into the 3-tier world. And if you have the right approach, it can be a lucrative channel for you. And you don't need to go in every state. You just need to go in a few. And perhaps this is a good way to talk, a good segue to talk about digital 3-tier, which many wineries don't even know is a thing.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that, especially for the small winery, because the segue there is that the small wineries, they believe the only avenue they have now is direct to consumer. We've done such a good job convincing them that direct to consumer is the way to go, that the pendulum's gotten too far over to one direction and they've forgotten about this 3-tier. But there's so many avenues open now that weren't open just even 8 years ago.
And not even 5 years ago. You only have to go back 5 years. Just yesterday, I think it was, within the last 2 days, LibDib celebrated their 5-year anniversary. It feels like they've been around longer than that, but it's not. It's just 5 years. So 5.5 years ago, you couldn't do digital 3-tier. And even when they started, it was only 1 state, then 2 states. Now it's 9 states.
Yeah, so describe 3-tier for our audience. I mean, not 3-tier, digital 3-tier.
Yeah. So, people should run, not walk, to the LibDib website and just read what their capabilities are. Read about the 9 states that they can put your product in. Read the success stories of other people using the platform well. It is, my father used to say, if something's too good to be true, it's probably not. Well, this is not too good to be true. It's happening right now while other people are asleep at the wheel. So let's talk about it.
Yeah.
What LibDib has done, and they've partnered with RNDC and to do the same thing. But LibDib is pretty much the game for digital 3-tier. They are a legally compliant 3rd-tier distributor. They're a real distributor in the 9 states in which they operate, but it's all digital. Now they have the order fulfillment process down cold. They're improving all the time. What a small winery needs to do is first get their product set up on their platform in the states that they want to be in. And I would suggest start with 1 or 2 or 3 states, get some traction and learn how to sell through those states. And then you can open up more states. It's just a rinse and repeat process at that point. So get your products up and running on LibDib. They'll walk you through it. The support is amazing that you get when you go onto the platform. Then you have to go find your own audience. So they don't do any selling for you.
That's the key there.
You have to, and this is a really straightforward process. It's a lead generation combined with email marketing. So let's Let's give a real life example. So Wisconsin has wine drinkers, okay? And I wonder how many wineries listening to this podcast have wines for sale in the future in Wisconsin. Probably not a lot. So you could go put up your products for sale in Wisconsin and then start running some very simple lead gen ads in the state of Wisconsin to draw trade buyers to you. And you'll need a lead magnet for something like this, like maybe the unofficial guide to Sauvignon Blanc, or the 12 wines you should be collecting now. You create a digital asset that gives something of value in exchange for an email address. Legitimate, honest, authentic, value that you're offering. And we have many, many examples of wineries who do this now, distilleries too.
Now, you recommend that the wineries create the lead magnet to targeting a consumer or targeting a buyer at a restaurant or a sommelier?
Targeting trade buyers. Facebook's targeting tools allow you to target trade buyers using audiences like Master Sommelier or even others, WSET. There's audiences inside Facebook that only a trade buyer would know about. Wine Searcher is one of those things. Most consumers don't use Wine Searcher, maybe more now than they used to. But for a long time, Wine Searcher was pretty much a tool of the trade, like 750. But you can target people who have an interest in those trade-related things and put your ads in front of them. So part of it is targeting. The other is messaging. Like we coach our clients in your ad copy, say, calling all sommeliers or calling all wine buyers. Get your hands on our latest guide to, managing your inventory in a more efficient way. Or you have to offer something of value. It can't be about your product. It's just too self-serving. When you do this, you'll have trade buyers signing up to be on your trade-only email list. That's the end game. Join our trade-only email list. Learn about special deals. Learn about, be able to talk directly to the producer. You just mentioned this in your buying role. It wasn't, you didn't have enough access directly to the producers, but thanks to the world of, the digital world, these restaurateurs in Wisconsin can have direct access to the producer, very often the owner. They can have a relationship with the owner of the winery. So how many restaurants would you need to put your wine on by the glass, one of your wines on by the glass? How many would you need to add another 40 or 50 cases a month to your sales? You wouldn't need very many, 6 or 8 of them. You don't need to be in every restaurant and retail store in Wisconsin. You only need to be in a couple dozen, and you've just transformed your business. Then you go do the same in Connecticut, Maryland, Florida, Colorado, Texas, California. It's New York. So it's really, really exciting. Now, there's a learning curve. There's definitely a learning curve, but it's worth it. It's worth pursuing because the
learning curve. What's the biggest mistake you find people making when they're trying to DIY this in that learning curve?
Being too self-promoting. Far and away, the biggest mistake is being too self-promoting. You have to add value and provide a value and a service to restaurants and wine bars. They need another Chardonnay like a hole in the head. They have no trouble getting their hands on a great $6 or $7 Chardonnay. No trouble at all. So you're not going to win them over by the quality of your product or your price. You better have something else, like being able to bring them knowledge or things that will help them sell more. What if a winery owner were to offer to take a look at a restaurant's by the glass list and see, maybe we could eliminate redundancies. Maybe you don't need 14 or 17 wines by the glass. Maybe you only need 11. And so which varietals would you have and which price points and which producers? And let me look at your Pinot Noir list, because you got 4 Sonoma Coast Pinots and you don't have anything from Oregon. And, there's advisory things that wineries can do to help restaurants have a better assortment. That's just one example of how to add value. So you create guides on how to cut your inventory in half and double your sales. So that's a little bit of, fanciful. What's the word? It might be a little too outlandish, but you get the idea. The idea is to step 1, bring them to your trade-only email list, then carefully and expertly build a relationship with them by adding value. And over time,
through those 12 touch points that are necessary.
And then one day you wake up and you get an email that a restaurant in Madison, Wisconsin just bought 2 cases of your Chardonnay. That's how it works. And it's totally scalable. It's totally scalable. You don't have to leave your desk, and you don't have to spend a lot of money to do it. So it's very exciting.
And that's very similar to the way wineries ought to be targeting people on the direct-to-consumer land. So there's definitely an overlap there between the two. Just the messaging and the target's a little bit different.
Yes, and we like to use Facebook and Instagram ads for the purpose of enrolling email subscribers, and then later, expertly and patiently using email marketing to nurture and then convert them into sales. That alone, and you know better than me, you're an expert in email marketing, but that alone, just being more patient and building relationships first before you start sticking offers in front of people, that could transform winery sales too.
Email marketing, it's such an art as far as segmenting the list and sending out the right messaging and then tracking what people have done with it. You don't just send out a blind email. You got to send out emails that have a goal, like there's different clicks there, and then change your messaging based on the person's interaction with it. And that's something that is, once again, back to the CRM system. And that maybe a little bit of segue here on the CRM system is one of the other mistakes that I see is they have so much information that's possible within that CRM system that I feel like too many people try to get all that information on the first interaction. And there's just too much friction there. Like, what is your advice on the first interaction? What's the minimum amount of information you would collect?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Well, if you think of it in stages, which is the CRM process, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are stages. The first stage is they don't even know you exist. So the first stage is that awareness, top of the funnel stuff, right? And the DTC people get this, but the three-tier trade people have never been exposed to this. Mm-hmm. But that is the first step, is to make them aware of you and draw them towards you by bringing something value. The next stage is all about researching and learning and doing your homework. So let's say a sommelier from a well-known restaurant in Chicago joins your email list. Well, you have work to do. You have work to study that account. What's their menu look like? What's their wine list look like? What are their busiest nights of the week? Maybe Sunday brunches are biggest, or maybe they've got 2 private dining rooms and that's where they do most of their volume. That next stage is research the account, research all the people who work there, from the general manager to the executive chef to the wine buyer, the assistant wine buyer, the dining room manager. It's what we call the cast of characters, collecting information about all the people who work there. In the process of doing that, usually opportunities will arise.
And then works on you to do it. So don't have a form out there that says your email, your name, your company, your revenue. That's just way too much information. That if you just got someone's email address as a salesperson, you should be able to figure the rest of that stuff out.
And yes, you have to do your homework. You have to use tools like LinkedIn and Yelp and Google to do. It's amazing what you can find out if you're diligent enough about people and accounts. And so the next step in the process is to make initial contact. If people would just wait before they make the initial contact, if they would wait until they've thoroughly exhausted all the research they can possibly do, the odds of making a meaningful connection go up dramatically. Yeah. When you're ready to make the initial contact, you don't have to waste the buyer's time by asking a lot of questions you should already know. How long have you worked there? Where did you work before? How often do you change your wine list? Those things you can find out on your own. The initial conversation is more like, how can I help you? I'm sure you're buried alive with people trying to sell you wine. What can I do to lighten your load? What do you need right now? Well, I've been using the same $6 Chardonnay in my banquet list for years. The price just went up and the supply is real spotty. So if you got a Chardonnay in the $6 to $7 range, I might want a sample. And so that really becomes that second touch point, is offering a sample, right? Which you can then instruct your distributor to do, or you can find another legal way to get a sample. So now the ice is broken and you've found some reason to interact. And it's just, from there, it's just looking for more reasons to reach out, inviting them to virtual events. Bring them information about something really new and exciting that's happening in their market. I spent many years working in a restaurant, and it sounds like you did too. You don't have time to go research anything. You don't have time to leave the 4 walls of the restaurant and see what your neighbors are doing down the street. So your winery partners and your distillery partners can be your eyes and ears in the market of what's happening and offering up ideas and trends. So if you treat it like a long-term courtship, you will, and when you make a sale, that way, it sticks. They don't just swap your Chardonnay out for somebody else's because it's 50 cents cheaper. When you make a sale in a quality way, based on service and dependability and trust, those placements stick. And they stick for years on end sometimes. Then you can go get another one. So it's a long-term game, many touch points, and you use your CRM system to keep track of where you are in those stages.
Very good.
It's very exciting, really.
It's super exciting. There's so much possibility right now as far as for a mid-range winery, a larger winery may have they're going to have a small winery is probably the same person that does the D2C marketing and the 3-tier marketing because there's just not enough staff there. But as you go up the case count and the revenue base, you're going to suddenly have a whole separate division selling 3-tier versus D2C. How did the two play together?
Yes, I wish they would play better together because they often operate in silos for many wineries. They have a very capable and robust DTC team, which includes social media, email marketing, e-commerce, tasting room, wine clubs. They got that covered. And then they might have 2 or 3 more salespeople out managing the 3-tier. The two don't talk enough about how to use CRM and how to integrate the things that they're learning. So let's say they're using HubSpot. How can I want to get me a user ID for HubSpot. Help me do a little bit of configuring to make it work for my 3-tier environment. Like I'm going to want buyer attributes like, are they on-premise or off-premise? Do they have any kind of certifications like WSET level 1, 2, or 3? I want to be able to capture buyer information in the same CRM system. You don't need a whole new CRM system. You just need to add more users and configure it for the 3-tier people. So just sharing the processes and sharing the tools and let the 3-tier people adapt it for their own needs, that would be a huge step in the right direction.
It would be huge. Even the market intelligence that you could leverage on a larger winery that goes national, they can look at the pockets within the United States where direct-to-consumer sales are strong and pretty much intuit that the 3-tier there's some 3-tier opportunities over there given the direct-to-consumer sales in that area. But if the two aren't talking to each other, they're both kind of wasting, they're doing the same work and they're kind of wasting effort there.
Well, one thing we've seen only recently is when the 3-tier people are planning an event in a particular market. Let's say they're going to do a winemaker luncheon in Atlanta. They ought to be able to send an email to all the DTC. The DTC team should be able to send an email to all of all the consumer context in their database and invite them to that dinner. That's only a fairly recent phenomenon. Now, some wineries do a much better job than others, but there is a way to leverage the 3-tier for consumers. And there's so much data now and more data coming, and understanding how to use that data and how to bring more of it into the system. And that's where you really start to see some traction of using both sides, the DTC side and the 3-tier side.
That's very, very good point there. And we're kind of seeing a hybrid of it right now. And I had Paul Mabry on a few months ago, and he just launched Pick.Wine, which is kind of a singular platform where both 3-tiers being sold on there and direct consumers being sold on there. And it's just free for all right now. You can sort based on price, based on location, based on all that. But the platform is making everybody play together.
Well, the opportunities are enormous, right? Because it's all data, and there's data on the consumers, all kinds of data, all kind of rich, meaningful data. There's also a lot of data on the trade buyers, the sommeliers, the wine shop owners. One good example, and you may have seen this too. I like to look at what Total Wine is doing because they have over 200 retail stores, but they really aspire to do a better job of e-commerce. Selling those same products online. So whether you go into one of their stores or you buy online, they want to capture that ring as opposed to having it go somewhere else. So they're very savvy marketers, and they're getting closer and closer to really nailing how do you do it all? How do you tie in the people who are physically buying product out in retail stores in various states and yet serving the same community online? And it's data. It's all about data and user experience. And
what advice would you give a small winery trying to get into Total Wine?
Well, it's a double-edged sword with Total Wine because
Mhm.
if you do a winery direct relationship, which many small wineries do, I mean,
Mhm.
Total Wine is a machine that needs to be fed by winery direct and spirits direct relationships. But the
Mhm.
minute you, as a winery, enter into that relationship, you immediately become the enemy of all of Total Wine's competitors. So you have to really think it through. And if you're
Mhm.
going to do business with Total Wine, you you'll want to, and you're going to do a winery direct relationship, you're going to want to peel off a SKU or a brand and keep it pure, just for Total Wine, and sell other brands out into the 3 tier. But I wouldn't start with Total Wine if I was
Mhm.
trying to. I mean, you have to ask, why do you want to be in Total Wine? Well, I want to sell more wine. Okay, well,
Mhm.
there might be a better, faster way to sell
Mhm.
more wine. That's a pretty tall mountain to climb. If you do want to get into Total Wine, you're going to need to have your, on the ground distribution, well documented. They're going to want to know who your distributors are. They may, if you do a winery direct, you have to know how that game works and how the
Mhm.
math works and how the logistics work, and so that you don't get caught in a supply chain crunch or a blip in the supply chain.
Mhm.
It's a very professional level of selling.
Mhm.
But short of that, if it was me, I would find out who are Total Wine's biggest competitors in some major markets around the
Well,
country and approach them. You might have an easier time there because they're fighting for their lives trying to
yes.
compete with Total Wine.
Yeah, I had one of my first agencies called Vintellect help independent wine stores compete with the better leveraged chain stores, Bevmo and Trader Joe's. It was a good business model. It was a good, but it's very hard with independent wine stores to get them to practice what they need to practice. And that was the one challenge, though, working at the wine company, was finding wines that weren't down the block at Vaughn's or weren't down the block at Bevmo that was with a 3% markup that you could
That's
actually make
right,
a margin on.
which is another good reason to be on LibDib. So back to the Wisconsin example.
Yes.
If you're on LibDib in Wisconsin and a restaurant buyer is looking to replace their Riesling by the glass with something that they can get a bit fatter margin on,
Mhm.
meaning it's not already everywhere at retail, this is a beautiful reason for them to come to LibDib to find a nice Riesling that they can put on by the glass and make a fatter margin. So wineries, I don't want to generalize too much, but a lot of wineries have a lack of understanding of what motivates a restaurant wine buyer or a retail wine buyer. And offering something different that they can get a fatter margin on is usually top of their list.
Mhm.
Next on their list is an uninterrupted supply. Imagine a restaurant turning their customers onto a great Riesling by the glass or Syrah by the glass,
Mhm.
and they're using 5 to 6 cases a week. And
Mhm.
then they run into a supply chain and they have to take it off the menu or reprint their menu and tell their customers, I'm sorry, we can't get that wine anymore. This is such a huge pain point for restaurants. So if you're going to go into that channel, be ready to provide an uninterrupted supply chain, because that's what's most important to them, not how cheap the wine is or how much better your Merlot tastes than somebody else's. That is
Especially
not
if you're multi-location, changing a menu is not trivial. Maybe easy for the bistro down the block that can just print it on the laser printer in the back, but you've got multiple locations with a polished menu. It's a major expense to ship it.
It is. So the 3 tier world is not as intimidating as many think if you understand how to enter it. And I can't recommend the digital entry as a great place to
Mhm.
start. Not a lot of downside risk of having your products listed on a website. Then you can begin the work of making meaningful relationships in that market and move some product. When you start moving product, you can scale that and
Sure.
enter new states.
So the modern playbook, like, to give it a very cursory summary, is embrace the technology, have a process, put it in a CRM. Don't try to make a one-off transactional sale. Know that it's going to take 10 to 12 touch points where you build your intelligence. And then suddenly the sale just kind of flows from there.
Yes, and a few other things. You don't need to be in all accounts, just a few really well chosen
Yes.
ones. Um, you don't want to spend too much on distributor. We're going to have to do most of it yourself. And just like DTC, you need, even in the 3 tier, digital 3 tier world, your email list is the most important selling asset you have.
Mhm.
You must grow it, you must nurture it, and it can't be taken away from you. So it's just that simple. Making email growing your email list of trade buyers needs to be very, very important to you, and then treating them like gold once they're on there.
Yeah,
You can always tell a client of Salisbury Creative, because when you go to their website and they have their email sign up form, somewhere on that form are two little radio buttons. I am a consumer or wine enthusiast, or I am a trade buyer working in a restaurant or retail store.
Oh,
because
good.
as they're collecting email addresses from website visitors, and if you don't think that restaurateurs, sommeliers are visiting winery websites, they absolutely are. When you roll out the red carpet for the trade buyers and you make them feel welcome, and they know you have a trade-only email list, they will sign up. And
that is excellent advice.
It starts as a trickle, and then it grows into a much larger stream.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like cathedral building or tree planting. It takes time. But it is while it's a slow way to riches, it's a sure path to riches for sure.
Mm-hmm. Toggle list. So that's the secret for everyone out there. So you may be seeing a few other websites now. They have that little toggle radio button there. I like that. It's
magic. It's magic. And of course, depending on the email software you're using, they automatically get the trade tag. Mm-hmm. And now you have your segmentation. You got your trade buyers on one list and your consumers on another. And there's so many ways to add further segmentation to the trade buyers. But
you are a wealth of knowledge and advice, and you have, so anybody that to check you out, I'm asked where people can find you online, but I will definitely plug your YouTube channel is phenomenal. Your videos are super polished. I do have to ask, do you do those in-house, or how do you produce those?
Yeah, no, I use this microphone and this camera, and we use Camtasia editing software. We do have in-house help for editing. My youngest son, Dan, works with us in the business, and he's very gifted at these things. He created our stinger that we use on the YouTube channel. Uh-huh. And so we like to crank them out and not worry about them being studio perfect. That one video I was telling you about that has over 11,000 views, called The Secret to Selling Wine and Spirits on Premise. It's one of the worst from a production quality standpoint. It's pretty bad. The lighting's bad. The sound's bad. But that's not what people want. They want the content, They want the information. That's what makes that video go viral and have so many people looking at it.
And getting it out there. I have a good friend, Ian Garlick, with Story Cruise and Authentic Web, who's his t-shirt, his motto is version done is better than version none. And that may be one of the biggest things for wineries looking to create a lead magnet or create something. Just get something out there and you can iterate upon it. Too often you're just waiting for that perfect piece that may never come, or that landing page that you want to target, or that get a CRM, get the touch points going, and then build on it. Don't worry about it being perfect on your first outreach.
It absolutely does. It's actually more endearing if it is imperfect. Mm-hmm. I think you get credit for the handheld, in the moment quality, whether it's video or PDF. It doesn't have to be perfect, especially if the content is kick-ass. Mm-hmm. The content is king phrase is overused, but it's still very true.
Oh, it's true. And Ben, as we're kind of wrapping down here, you've got some incredible content, incredible e-courses. Where can people find out more about that?
Well, the best place is salisburycreative.com. Mm-hmm. At salisburycreative.com, you can access the Modern Playbook, which is our free online course. You can also access all of our published content in our blog and our YouTube channel. And then you can also access our paid online courses. We have a signature online course called Wine Sales Stimulator. We're also getting ready to launch our first ever group coaching and consulting program, which will carry the same name, Wine Sales Stimulator. So you can get on the wait list there. But salisburycreative.com, and you can find all of our assets there.
Oh, fantastic. And then you're always kind of on the speaking circuit, so people can hear you there. And you were telling me about you're starting some LinkedIn Lives.
Yeah, Friday, tomorrow, 1:00. I'm going to try to do every Friday at 1:00 Eastern to show up on LinkedIn Live to talk about these topics. Tomorrow, we're talking about how to find the richest targets of restaurants and retailers in any market in the U.S. So definitely follow us on LinkedIn. That's our largest following in LinkedIn, and joining our email list, which you can do from the website. But being on our email list will help too, because every Friday we publish sales tips and tricks. And I can't think of the last time I tried to sell somebody something with my email. I'm just trying to educate and enrich relationships. So it's a safe email list to belong to. You won't get bombarded with stuff you don't want.
And that may be the next biggest secret. They always say always be selling, but always be offering value is really what you should be doing.
The sales will happen. The sales will happen naturally.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ben, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, it was fun, and I enjoyed talking with you. I have a lot of respect for you. I'm a big fan of what you and your team do. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks for listening to the Legends Behind the Craft podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.